Hello everyone, welcome back to Which is the Moon. I am Natalie, your Friday hostess. This week's topic is choose your own topic. So my topic for this week is shadow work. Now shadow work is something that's talked about somewhat in the community, but I don't think it's talked about a lot. And when you say shadow work to someone who's relatively new to the craft or doesn't know what it is, then they get all these images conjuring up in their mind of you're wearing a dark robe and you're in the forest deep at night and you're working some sort of a conjuring spell. And that's not exactly what it is at all. In fact, shadow work does not even have its origins in witchcraft. Okay, plain and simple. Shadow work refers to a terminology that was first coined by the psychologist Carl Jung. He was a Swiss psychologist who worked under Freud, and although I know, lots of Freud's theories have been thrown out over time and disproved and all that, the fact of the matter was at the time Freud was the man, and Carl Jung studied under Freud, and together they started to understand that there are aspects of yourself that you are aware of, the conscious, and aspects of your personality that you are either completely unaware of or are in such total rejection of that you just don't even realize you're responding that way, and that is your subconscious. Now, your subconscious develops because you are a human being, and as a human being, you are a social creature whose care, at least for the first few years of life, are totally dependent on that of another person. When you are a baby, your mind, I don't want to say is blank, because we do know that you are pre-programmed biologically for language, learning, and for speech, and for learning. Okay, you learn before you're even born. They have found that babies learn in the womb. Yes, babies do learn in the womb. They have a brain before you even know you're pregnant, just so you know. But that being said, you do prune certain information, particularly in the first 3 years of life. What that means is when a baby is born, for example, this is an example. When a baby is born, a baby speaks every known sound and every known language in the world. Okay? How do you learn to speak one language over another? Well, when the baby is laying in the bed and the baby is, mama, all of a sudden the mom goes, oh, you said mama. Oh, say it again. And the baby's brain goes, aha. That means nothing, but mama means something. Cha-ching, got a response from the caregiver. And so the brain gets rid of the abagataba and keeps the mama. And that is how you learn a language. So theoretically, well, not theoretically, I mean, a baby can learn any language in the world. That's why it's easier to teach a child who's younger than someone who's older, such as myself, to speak a second language, because you are programmed that way. That being said, you're also programmed to learn and respond. For those of you that have no background at all in psychology and psychological development, I will tell you that there are several theories of development, each one having its own merits. A lot of you are familiar with classical conditioning, which had to do with Pavlov's dog. You know, he would ring the bell and give the dog a treat, ring the bell, give the dog a treat. Pretty soon he could ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate. He's salivating in the biological response, hearing the bell, because he associated hearing the bell with getting the treat. So the body automatically prepared. From classical conditioning came operant conditioning. Operant conditioning was B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner believed that you respond to certain things a certain way because of a response and reward system. Carl Jung kind of recognized that as well, but Carl Jung realized that there were aspects of our personalities, not so much our behaviors, but our personalities that we suppressed because of that same caregiver relationship. There are certain behaviors that you do that are either rejected by your caregivers, if not totally, reward and response is kind of what I'm going for there. So for example, the example that B.F. Skinner gave in his book about his life was masturbation. Okay, it is what it is. His mother told him basically you're going to go blind kind of thing. And so he learned to hide that behavior from his mother because he knew that if he did it, she caught him, he was going to be punished. Jung found that we tend to reject certain aspects of ourselves because of a negative response or the things that we have learned from our families. by the way they treat us when we respond or react a certain way. So in some households, crying is not acceptable, regardless of the situation. So these people have learned to reject their own response to crying. They can keep themselves from doing it. So how does that relate to shadow work? Well, Jung coined the term shadow because the shadow he saw were energies of the selves that were suppressed, those aspects of your personality that you don't necessarily want the rest of the world to see. So how does this relate to shadow work as a witch? Or why is this important to witches? Or why do so many witches engage in shadow work? Well, the thing is that we are human beings whole and complete. In other words, there are light and dark aspects to all of us. There are good and bad, yin and yang kind of, aspects to ourselves. Things that we have been taught to judge as good or bad. And when you reject certain aspects of yourself, you tend to be rejecting your whole self in some way. Now, that's not to say that you should necessarily embrace those bad impulses that you have. If, for example, you felt an impulse to choke small children when you were around them, it's not a good impulse to embrace. But you need to accept it and understand that you feel that way around small children, and maybe keep yourself from being around small children. But that being said, that's just an extreme example. I'm trying to think of another less extreme example, like, I don't know. Okay, maybe you don't like people who are blonde. For whatever reason, you just don't like blondes. People that are blonde annoy you, irritate you, you can't stand them, you don't like to be around them, and you can't even really tell why. That would be something you would want to do some shadow work on, because that is an aspect of yourself. You try to hide it, so maybe you're overly friendly to blonde people that you meet. Hi, how you doing? But you aren't really sure why you respond that way. Looking at yourself in that way, in doing shadow work, you are bringing light to those aspects of yourself that you consider to be less than desirable. Things that make you angry, things that make you fearful, things that maybe are just aspects of your personality that are not socially acceptable. We all have those things, and in denying those impulses entirely, you do yourself a great disservice because you're self-rejecting in a way. And that is why shadow work is so important and so well embraced by a lot of people in the witchy community, because it is a way to examine those aspects and bring some good out of what is otherwise perceived as bad. Now, I have been trying very hard to get away from the good and bad labels, the light and dark labels, because I think we automatically associate dark with bad and light with good. And I want to move away from that kind of imaging myself personally. It is difficult because you have to make some judgments about things. You don't have to be judgmental about things. There's a big difference between the two. You are called upon to make judgments and discernments every moment of every day of your life. And there are some people that are just not good people. And we're talking people like John Wayne Gacy, the Zodiac Killer, Charles Manson, people like that. They're just not good people. They have gone beyond just doing things that are out of the social norm. They have brought harm to others, which in my opinion is always evil. When you bring harm to other people, whether you're physically hurting them, emotionally hurting them, whatever, it's bad. We are not supposed to do that to one another. We are a community of human beings. And there are times when you're called upon to maybe defend yourself or defend others that will cause you to bring harm to others. And I know that that's regrettable, but sometimes necessary. But I still think it's evil to an extent, yeah. But when you are engaging in shadow work, you are trying to understand every aspect of yourself. It's a little bit of the opposite of focusing on the positive and trying to build on the positive. You're trying to look at those things that are not as happy-dappy and understand your responses and bring those things to light so that you can understand and embrace yourself more fully. Now, how do you engage in shadow work? Well, first of all, I personally do not recommend engaging in any deep level of shadow work right off the bat. Really delving deep into why do I feel this way can sometimes be a bad thing. I recommend starting with something a little more simple like a geneograph. What a geneograph is, again, this comes from my Family of Origins class, is when you are doing, basically it looks like a genealogy of your family, but instead of being just a genealogy, you're talking to your family members transgenerationally, and you are trying to gain insight to what happened. You're looking at how they died, what they did, who their partners were, blah, 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 down the line. Did they suffer sexual abuse, and so on and so forth. And there's a different marker type of box or shape for each one of those that is extremely telling. And for my family particularly, I found that sexual abuse was something that had occurred transgenerationally down the line of my family, which I hopefully have put a stop to that cycle. But until you understand those things, you cannot put a stop to those things. You cannot stop the patterns that you wish to cease, and you cannot heal yourself as a whole person until you have really looked at those things and understand their origins and where they come from. So, if you are interested in working in shadow work, you can get a guide. Now, I am always cautious about recommending anybody specific unless I've worked with them myself. See, who's doing shadow work? But at the same time, it is sometimes a good idea. Sometimes having a guide to help you is very good. People who go to counseling are doing a low level of shadow work many times because your counselor is going to want you to look into why are you responding a certain way, especially if your response is anger or violence. Now, anger in and of itself is not an emotion per se. It's not a primary emotion. Let me put it that way. It is an emotion. It's a secondary emotion. Okay? So your emotions are your outward expression of your inward feelings. Okay? That's the definition of emotion. When you react in anger, anger is a secondary emotion, as I just mentioned, that covers one of three things. Either fear, usually fear, and especially in men, fear of some sort on some level, confusion, or disappointment. Anger is always covering one of those three things. So why sometimes do you respond angrily to certain situations? It could be that someone is touching a part of your shadow, so to speak. If somebody accuses you of something and you're instantly angry, and I don't mean accusing you of like stealing a candy bar or something like that. I'm talking about if somebody calls you, somebody calls you a bigot, okay? You're a bigot. And your first response is, I am not a bigot. I don't know what you're talking about. They may have touched on something there. So that might be something that you want to look at and explore. If they call you a liar and you respond the same way, why are you responding so angrily? Because if that is not a part of who you are, then you should be able to go, whatever, and let it go. Okay, if that's what you think, whatever. And you have to learn to let that go. So we talked about shadow work in my Family of Origins class. We just didn't call it shadow work. We talked about working with the deeper, darker selves. There are several books on doing this sort of work that are not at all witchy in nature, but there's one called Forgiving the Devil, which is a great one. There's also one called Remembering a Different Future, which is also a good one. And basically it's about going back and looking at those things in your life and trying to understand your responses to those. Getting a guide to help you through shadow work specifically might not be a bad idea. And I don't mean this, I mean shadow work specifically. I don't mean just counseling in general. Counseling, yes, like I just said, is a light form of shadow work because they're going to get you to delve into your responses to things and why do you feel that way. But it's different. The focus of shadow work is to look specifically at those things that you already know you don't want within your capacity. Sometimes you aren't even sure because it is so deeply embedded in your subconscious that you do need something to help draw that out, and that's where having a guide might be necessary. You can do things like, I know there's a site called ShadowWork.com. They do workshops and things like that on shadow working. There's also the Work of the Soul, Mary Elizabeth, who is a shadow work guide. I cannot endorse these sites personally. I'm just simply throwing them out there as possible resources. I recommend that you go ahead, research them a little bit more yourself and see if they might be someone who could work with you. But do I feel a guide is necessary? Absolutely, for doing shadow work? Not at all. You can begin doing your own shadow work. I recommend that you be very comfortable with yourself before you begin in shadow work. Already have a pretty good idea of what you want to explore in your shadow work in terms of initially maybe starting with something that you know about yourself that you don't like, okay? Or something that you want to understand a little bit better about yourself. Why do I always get so angry when this happens? Start there and begin by journaling. Start logging those experiences. I got really angry today because of this. I need to understand why I got so angry about this. Then moving on deeper into, well, maybe that was because of this. And it causes you to reflect back and try to remember some things. Now, what I was talking about babies a little while ago, I want to bring up a concept that deals with relationship building. Mary Ainsworth, who was a psychologist, did a theory, it's a very big theory, on relationship building. And she wrote a book called Mother-Infant Attachment. So it was an article, actually. I have the original article, or what's called the seminal article. But attachment theory comes from her and the work of Bowlby, B-O-W-L-B-Y, Bowlby. They understood that certain things that happened to you in infancy affected your ability to have even a romantic relationship later on in life. That there are certain things, sometimes you'll smell a certain something and it just brings back a memory like that, or you'll hear a certain something and you'll be, you get nervous around somebody and you're not sure why. Somebody gives you the heebie-jeebies. There's a reason that person's giving you the heebie-jeebies. They're triggering a response from infancy or from early childhood that you may not fully understand anymore because it's been suppressed into the subconscious. So sometimes you do need a guide to help you with that, but to start out, you can just start looking at, why does this person bother me, or why does this situation bother me, or what, maybe there's an aspect of yourself that you don't like, and you want to look into why is that more. Now, I recommend that you be very well grounded when you do this, because sometimes looking at those dark aspects of ourselves kind of opens us up to other things that are not so pleasant. If you're not careful, if you're depressive, you might become more depressive. That's why they recommend a lot of times you have a guide, somebody that can help you, because they can help you process and work through that. One of the things that I had to do in one of my family classes also was process papers. We had to write a paper each week on an event that occurred in our life that week and why it bothered us or what happened. And we had to process through our emotions, talking about the theories that we were learning in school, in our classes. And I found that to be very helpful. That's what really started me on the path to shadow work. I don't talk about my shadow work a lot because it does deal with a lot of very deep things that I don't necessarily want everyone to know about me. I did suffer a lot of sexual abuse as a child from people within my family and outside of it. And a lot of my shadow work is centered around that, because I do think that that's had a profound effect on me as a person and who I am today, and not always in a good way. So I started out with that. That's where my shadow work started. But then you start looking into, why are you an angry person? Because I was a very angry person until about 3 years ago when I started on this path. Actually, it has helped me to understand that there are light and dark aspects to everything, and that it's not necessarily positive and negative. Okay, sorry about that. Having technical issues this week. I don't know what's going on with my computer. I tried to record this video like 50 times on my computer, and right in the middle of doing it, it started doing this funny electronic-y thing, and then the camera went out. So I don't know what's going on with that. I don't want to blame it on Windows 10, but I wasn't having a problem with my camera until I downloaded Windows 10, and now all of a sudden it seems to work fine sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work at all, and sometimes it's just, it's never done what it did today before, where I was in the middle of recording a video, and all of a sudden you start seeing this electronic interference, and then the camera went out. So anyhow, what I was saying, I'm trying to recapture my thought here, I apologize. So this is going to be uploaded in a couple of different ways. I'm going to have to use the YouTube video manager to mush this together. But basically, you don't necessarily need a guide when doing shadow work. If you're new to shadow work, or if you want to go deeper with shadow work than you feel you can do on your own, certainly finding someone to guide you is probably not a bad idea. There are people who specialize specifically in that. The 2 sites that I mentioned, I know were ones I found on the internet. Not necessarily ones I can endorse or embrace myself because I have never used them. But it is out there. Perhaps finding someone who's done extensive shadow work themselves that can help you find someone to guide you, or could maybe give you some pointers. For myself, when I am doing shadow work, I do sometimes incorporate another person, but I don't think they even realize I'm doing it. Because what I do is I try to find things that person is doing. I'm trying to understand why I'm responding to that person the way that I am, so I'll start probing them for information. Well, do I always react this way? Maybe it's just something going on that day, or what have you. So I journal a lot, I meditate a lot, and I utilize scrying when doing shadow work as well. Particularly mirror scrying is effective for me when doing shadow work, because it allows me to focus on simply what is there. So shadow work is not necessarily dealing with your evil aspects or all that's bad about you, just things that you have been taught are to be repressed, that you are repressing yourself for whatever reason. Maybe it's not something that's societally acceptable per se where you live, and understanding those aspects to yourself so that you can more fully embrace yourself. And in fact, when I started doing shadow work, I kind of gave it a definition. I've told you what it is, but defining it's easier. I define it as an attempt to look deeply into your own psyche to better understand your own thoughts, feelings, emotional responses, and sometimes perceived negative behaviors. So it's a way to look at yourself, understand that which is all of you, and appreciate the whole you, so that you can move forward with those behaviors, acting on them, recognizing them, no longer suppressing them per se. You're not keeping them hidden. You're aware that they're there. Maybe you don't make it public, but you're aware that it's there. And in being more aware of those kinds of things, it allows you to better respond in other situations. Instead of acting out in anger, perhaps now you can go, okay, and you can let it go. It's a way of differentiation, which is a term that's used in Bowen systems theory. Bowen said that when you are in a relationship with someone, including yourself, you are doing a dance. Each partner knows their steps and they follow those steps. So what happens is we get locked into patterns of behavior that are possibly negative, not so good for ourselves. Whether it causes us to self-reject or to reject others or to whatever. And that doing this type of work allows you to be aware of the dance so that you can alter the steps. And what happens when you do that is that you grow as a person. You understand yourself better, and in understanding yourself better, it allows you to recognize patterns of behavior in others and understand that their behavior may not be directed towards you per se, but they are responding from some deep emotional sitwell deep within them that is causing them to respond in this way. And when you recognize that, when you can see your own shadow and you recognize that in others, it allows you to be able to help that person out of that situation more easily, even if it's not directly giving them a hand and pulling them out. So that's my video on shadow work, what it is, why it's important, why we within the witchy community embrace it more so than maybe others. I don't hear the term called shadow work as much in the field of psychology. It's called self-work or understanding self or deep psychological evaluation, but essentially that's what it is. So I hope that this has been informative to you. I hope that you will approach me with any questions. I did want to add that as we have in other seasons, we are preparing for the end of the season. For those of you that have seen seasons, you know what I'm getting at here. So in order to be included in that end of the year thing, end of the season thing, I would like to pose this to you all. If you respond to this in the comments section, you'll be automatically included. I will see to that. I would like to know an aspect of yourself that you feel may come from shadow. What is something, and it doesn't have to be anything personal per se. Maybe you're just an angry person, or maybe you're a sad person, or you tend to suffer from seasonal affect disorder or something like that. But what is an aspect of yourself that you feel would be a good starting point in doing shadow work? I would be very interested in hearing your responses. And again, feedback is always appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. Many bright blessings, and blessed be.